Okay, we there? Hello. Hi. Hold on. What the heck's going on? Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. If you've been around this block with us before on these monthly webinars, if you're new, welcome. General gist of these things, safe place to think and feel. We love you to participate. I'll go through some slides just to kind of ground us a little bit into some basics, and then from there it's open season, questions, comments, etc. And feel no pressure to participate, but we'd sure love it. This is meant to be a safe place, sort of, group therapy light, or I don't know what the right phrase is for what this is exactly, but something safe. And speak up if you're moved. So today we're going to talk about mortal fear, essentially. But before we jump in, let's head over to Lady Sonia for some basics on the logistics. Where is my cursor? There we go.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. So I'm just going to go over how you can interact with us after BJ gets through these slides. So there's two ways you can do it. You can click the little raise hand button up at the top there, and we will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. And if you prefer to not do that, you can just type your question into the question area, and I will read it out loud for BJ to address. And to the point of, being a safe space, if you would prefer to remain anonymous, please just let us know and we will make sure to not mention your name. That's no problem at all. And of course, if you've been to these before, sometimes we're not always able to get to all the questions during this hour. So if that does happen, we will record a little second session where we get to the questions that we didn't get to during this hour. So please don't worry if we're not able to get to it during this time. We will address it and post it along with this recording so that you have something to refer to for your question. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, guys. So, as usual, artwork courtesy of Sonia. Okay, mortal fear. It's the biggie. It's the it doesn't get much bigger than this one. It's common. I think I'm not sure whether to believe myself when I say I'm not afraid to die. I'm not sure. I don't know that I don't even know that I believe that. Part of that is because, of course, as we sit here, this is an anticipated experience. It's one that, depending on your belief system, we haven't done before. And even if we have in some way, it may be difficult to recall that. So for the most part, for all intents and purposes, this is a fear of this thing that hasn't yet happened. And we know will happen. We know it in our bones somehow. So it might even be, if we studied the fear of death or dying, it may prove to be the sort of root or the nub or the node of all fears. That anything that frightens us translates eventually to our fear of death, a fear of being no more. So it's big, it's ancient, it's as old as humans are, and it kind of gets at, well, it gets at the human condition. It's not like any phobias that some of us might have, a fear of heights that some folks have, or a fear of snakes, or a fear of, name anything, just about anything else. And you'll get a, diverse response of whether people are afraid of it or not. This is different. But I think one thing to appreciate here is that it has to do with the fact that we human beings have a mind. I don't know what the heck, how we got to this point of having a mind with consciousness. I don't believe that humans are the only ones with consciousness, but we certainly have it in abundance. So much power in our minds that I'm not sure we humans know how to wield it thoughtfully. It's, evolutionarily speaking, I'm not sure humans, I think the jury's out on our species, whether it was prudent to give us so much brain power. Anyway, that's a digression. But this idea, and it gets at the root of a lot of religions, the Judeo-Christian tradition, for example. The original sin, ate from the tree of knowledge, right? Not the tree of life, the tree of knowledge. So we got knowledge, but it came at a cost. one of the things that we had to know now is that we had to know we die. We had to have this enter this existential loop, this riddle of trying to love our lives, get into our lives, even while it's slipping away all the time. It's a real humdinger. So let's just let that cut a wide berth for all of us. And this fear can show up in many ways, including a sort of a fascination, a morbid curiosity, etc. So anyway, it's a big one. And I guess one more point to make is, I think the trick is, because it's kind of not going away, is to make use of it. And this is where, unlike a fear of heights, which might just tell you to avoid heights, a fear of death or dying, it's going to happen. So we know that, so you don't get to avoid it. So in this way, when something won't leave, I think we have to find a way to loving it, or at least being interested in it. And so this stranger in our house, this death thing, maybe it's not a stranger. If he or she, it's not leaving, well, we need to kind of some way work with it. And so the admonition here is for us to, when we find ourselves with this kind of fear, is to actually go into it. It's a very ripe, fertile place. And if we get into our mortal fear, you start finding your way into curiosity, interest. You start getting clear on what you're afraid to lose, and therefore what you love. All sorts of things can flow from it. But my point here is, this is a fear that won't, it's not normal as humans can be, and it's not going away, and therefore we need to find a way to get into it. Okay. So regret is a big one, right? A lot of us, sometimes I think of the job of someone working in hospice or palliative medicine is oftentimes, essentially, we're the regret police. Essentially, we work with people in a way we can forecast, we can look around corners together and try to head off regret at the past. And this is one great reason to come to terms with our mortality earlier in life, is because then you're much less likely to squander your time, to ignore things of interest, etc., and therefore much less likely to stockpile a bunch of regrets. This is one of my favorite reasons to pay attention to mortality. But regret, I think it's something that we can minimize. It's like suffering. There's unnecessary suffering, and there's some suffering that's just going to come no matter what we do. I mean, with the human mind having this penchant to go back in time and forward in time and to revisit experiences, personally, I find it impossible to not have regret. So here again, the admonition is maybe to minimize regret, but also find some way to make peace with it. I don't know that it'd be possible to entirely avoid regret in a life, except through some sort of a sense of perspective. I mean, sometimes I just choose to not regret because I know I can't go back in time. So I'm sort of choosing to not let regret take hold. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. One more thing to say about regret is the way I think of it as it's something as it's almost like a fear of the past. So I think it's related to mortality certainly, but it's also related to fear. And when I think of my regrets, it's like me looking back in time with a sense of fear, like, why didn't I do this? Why was I afraid? Why am I afraid now to have not? Why can't I accommodate the choices I made? So it feels for me, in my own experience anyway, that regret is something like a fear of the past. Denial. Well, a lot of people invoke denial as the reason why, we Americans, we never deal with death or illness or whatever, or old age, because we're all in denial. None of us actually believes we're going to get old or die. I don't know, maybe certainly that's a player in this, but this stuff is complicated. And so while denial may be in the mix for many of us, it's also true that it's unavoidable. I don't know that our human capacity, if we can keep all truth right in front of us all the time, that's a pretty heightened state. And maybe with a lot of work, it's that's sort of like, real-time enlightenment all the time. Pretty tricky. Otherwise, requires that we're forgetting things along the way. Just to get through the day, to focus on something means to not focus on other things, and all sorts of things slip into the side and hang out in the shadows. So I don't know. Denial probably unavoidable too. And what's more about denial is it's actually a pretty useful coping mechanism. Here again, even if you could, try getting out of bed if you could keep all truth in front of you all the time. So denial, not only unavoidable, but actually pretty dang useful. So here again, the work is to I'm not going to be in denial. It's more like, okay, how can I be aware and thoughtful about my denial and be careful with it and check myself, etc. And it's also, well, I'll leave this more to discussion. We'll jump in later. Let me keep moving here. Sorry, guys. There we go. So I've kind of referred to the human mind, our human penchant. You know how there's like, we talk to ourselves and to each other, we encourage each other to be present, be in the moment. Great, yeah, love to. It's just really, really hard. Again, the human brain horsepower to move all over the place. I'm constantly thinking about the past. I get very prone to nostalgia, very prone to regret. So I spend a lot of time in the past. I don't spend as much time in the future anymore. I used to, but not as much, some. But the point here, being present is hard. And what's more, one of the ways this shows up is grief. You know, we've talked a lot about grief on this series together here. So I think we know there's a place for it. It's an important, very important place for it. But the thing to realize, it doesn't start at the moment of the actual loss. It starts at the moment we conceive or anticipate the loss. So here again, in a nod to our future and past orientation, anticipatory grief is often in the room when we start thinking about our own death or the death of others. We start grieving that because we know it's coming. So this is a really important one to name, just to understand the way your mind's working and understand the way you feel, the way you do. Like it comes up a lot of times with families, you know, right? Like, why am I so sad my beloved Johnny's still here? Why he's not gone yet? Why am I not soaking up every millisecond with my beloved Johnny? You know, what's wrong with me? Well, what's wrong with you? You love Johnny, and and you're a human being, and you've got a mind that jumps around. And of course you're grieving Johnny while he's still here. And then once you kind of name that, you can it can become a pretty sweet thing, because then Johnny and I can grieve together while he can help me, you know. So a lot to say about anticipatory grief. It's powerful for us. It just reminds us of this sort of future orientation that we have. And it may be very much explain how you feel when you think about your own death or somebody close to you. Interesting little tangent on that. We know from the terror management theory guys, I can't remember their names. They're researchers, fascinating people. There's a terror management theory, TMT. Is it TMT? Terror management theory. Anyway, it's close enough. It's not quite right. Excuse my mind this morning, but that'd be interesting work if you guys kind of want to play around with this, like what humans do before their fear of death. We do all sorts of funny things. We go to great lengths to kind of cushion ourselves from it. And we cause a lot of trouble too. We do fascinating things with it, and we also cause a lot of trouble. So those guys have unearthed like a lot of research that says like we tend to be more concerned with the death of people we care about close to us than our own death, for example. And that might sound like, oh gosh, we're so selfless and altruistic, we don't care, we're not worried about our own demise, but we're worried about people we love. That may be true to some people, but it's actually probably more points to the fact that it's almost sort of seems impossible to imagine our own deaths. I can imagine losing someone I love. That's happened. I know what that feels like. It's very hard for me to picture losing myself. It's very hard for me to picture being dead, because as soon as I'm picturing it, I'm there to picture it. And around and around we go. So that data is probably sort of more suggests the impossibility of humans to imagine their own death. It's actually really difficult. So while jumping around, sorry guys, we're not jumping around, another resource to dig into this subject more if you like. I mean, it's all over music, it's all over philosophy, the existential philosophers specifically, but all over everything. Again, this is bedrock human stuff. But you might love, for those of you who haven't read it, the Ernest Becker book, The Denial of Death, 1975, I think, Pulitzer Prize. Made famous in the Annie Hall movie in other ways too. Beautiful read, fascinating. And here again, he's a cultural anthropologist and just digs into what do humans do with this fear of death and all the weird machinations we go through. Okay, moving on from the future here. So one thing that does come up, with patients and families and people, when I'm trying to work with folks to try to dig into this, trying to look at this fear, what is it exactly that we're afraid of? One of the early branch points in that kind of inquisition, is that the right word? Inquiry, inquisition's something else. Inquiry is, are you afraid of dying? That is the process, the lived experience of the final moments of a life. Is it a fear of the suffering that most people imagine has to be part of that process? Or are you afraid of not being, of being no more, of non-existence, or the great unknown, you might say? These are very different propositions. For my purposes as the clinician in the room or whatever, the counselor, because the dying process is something we know about. That is a lived, witnessed, observed experience. Anyone who's worked in hospital been around it a lot, and there's a lot to say about it. We can just talk through a lot of those fears, and there's a lot we can do with medications, and suffering isn't necessarily a part of the picture. There's a lot we can do to avoid pain. There's a lot that we can do to process that suffering and turn those tears into something closer to joy, or at least link them to joy. There's a lot we can do. Dying, it doesn't have to be an absolutely miserable experience. It can be quite beautiful. And so that is something we can reassure each other and talk through. It's a reason to get hospice in the mix sooner than later. It's a reason to open our eyes to it and plan for it a little bit. Versus the fear of being no more. Well, I can't lend expertise to that question. None of us can, I don't believe. So this is when I hear the fear of being no more. Well, this is when I just pull up a chair next to Bert and say, you and me both, brother. Yeah, I don't know either, but let's look together. Let's think about that, or let's explore that together as two fellow human beings who haven't died yet. So very different energy, very different response. The fear of death is often time to go read the philosophers. It's a time to go to church or temple or synagogue, etc. So it begs a different response. So I find that a very useful branch point, again, to find a way to kind of dig in and to also respond to these fears. Okay, treatment. Well, so what's the treatment for this mortal fear stuff? Well, we've kind of been highlighting a little bit along the way. Rule number one is to go into that fear, to dare to find a way to look at it, because it is such a fertile place, because it's such an essential place. Again, I can't say it enough. I think, again, we are so prone to shame and shaming each other these days around big natural acts like death or illness. So again, I can't say it enough that you are, if you're afraid of death or dying, you're what we call normal. And I mean that in the greatest sense. We all are. So let's just start there. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. When you hear people, I'm not afraid to die. Well, let's see how they act when they're actually dying. We'll see. Maybe they're not. And I say that. I say I'm more afraid of living than dying. I'm more afraid to screw up my life than I am to screw up my death. I don't know how I'll screw up my death, but I screw up my life often enough. So anyway, point here in terms of treating, it's in quotes because it's a little tongue in cheek. It's not a pill for this. You can pursue pills, you can numb yourself out, you can do all that stuff, but you're gonna miss out on a lot. The treatment really here is of this very natural, normal phenomenon, is to get into it, be with it, even maybe love it. Again, you start looking, and it's gonna tell you what you love. It's gonna encourage you to be here now while you can. It's gonna encourage you to be interested in the big night sky when you see that star and you realize the light that's hitting your eye is billions of years old, and it starts bending time in your mind, and you start wondering if that star even still exists in this moment, just like you might not exist in this moment at some point, et cetera, and on you go. It's fascinating. You get in touch with this fear and you find yourself at the root of how most art gets made, most music, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here again, the first order of business is find a way to look. And I don't mean ramming your face in it. It's not something to force. I think, again, thanks to denial, I think we take a little bit in as much as we can handle, and we use denial to temper it. We use forgetting to temper it. We use busyness to temper it. We use awe, joy, other things to hit the pause button on this fear, this sense that we're one step closer. Every minute that goes by, I'm 1 minute closer to my death. Oy. So, but those kinds of rhetoric, you're gonna be less swayed by that rhetoric the more you have your own relationship to this very personal subject, this very universal and very personal subject. That's part of its powers. You have everything in common with someone, and you have all the singularity in the world, all the individuality in the world, all the, the variations on themes of this one are endless. So this is also where our personality pops through and what we do with it. Okay, so I think I should stop there. I'm hoping you guys have some thoughts or questions or experiences. So obviously these are tips of icebergs, or tip of a huge iceberg, the iceberg. So we're just scratching the surface a little bit here. Let's see if we can go deeper. Anyone out there, Sonia, is there any hand up or anything yet? Questions, comments, guys? Anyone want to share any experiences? Any near-death experiences, for example?
Got one comment here that's just more around the fear of death is the fear of missing out on my life and the fear of missing out of things with my kids and my kids' kids and, the people that you care about. So it's not necessarily being afraid of being dead, but people going on without you.
Yeah, I sure get that one. Yeah, FOMO. I mean, I should stop saying that. Then it makes light, almost makes too cute or something. But it is a basic fear of missing out. I experience it daily. I hear that comment. That is profound. And I don't know if you guys I've had that a version of that, in a sort of slightly different direction. Like, that moment I remember after any loss in my life, there's sort of a moment it almost feels egregious to witness life going on. What? The buses are still running and people are still doing stuff and people are still going to work. Don't they know that I just lost this or that? I mean, it can be a funny feeling sometimes. There's both the salve and the knowledge that life keeps going in one form or another. That's both a salve and I think, and also a torture, a little bit of a torment. So anyway, I'd imagine a lot, maybe everyone on this call has a version of that sense of that fear of missing out. It's interesting too to think about that, because the source of that fear, I would say, I guess, and you tell me please what you think, but the source of that fear, again, thanks to us daring to look, well, what's the source of that fear but love? That's, to my heart, to my mind, that's an expression of love that I so want to be around, to see my X, Y, or Z do X, Y, or Z, because I care, because I love them. I so love them. This is where this love is such an interesting player in all this thing, because here too, if we're not thoughtful, if we don't dare to look, we might feel that love is part of the problem. Well, if I didn't love my whatever, I wouldn't be so racked with torment, the idea of living without them or them living without me. If you're not careful, you can find a way. I'm not saying you're doing this at all, obviously, I'm just riffing here, but sometimes that idea of loving things, loving the world, loving life feels like a hazard. I think often it does. And I think I'm pretty thoroughly convinced by now that love is absolutely actually the answer to all of this, or at least part of the answer, or at least the most durable response I've ever seen or witnessed or been part of. Anyway, just to get back to your comment, that love of your kids, that love of life, the idea that death is terrifying, just because that means, it seems to mean at least, that we don't have access to those things anymore. And that's just a terrifying or difficult thought. So thanks for sharing. I think that is a very common feeling, this basic fear of missing out. Another reason to soak up every ounce of life while you have it, all the while knowing that it's never going to be enough, in a way, so you can forgive yourself for being greedy about it, just wanting more and more. And this is also where I think it's very powerful to, over the course of a mature life, when you maybe head towards making amends with reality, including death, you know, one of the things that can happen is a sort of a decentralization, how you find joy or meaning in the world, even if it's not flowing through you. Like I love this feeling when I feel really right with myself, really right in the world, and I witness it in other people who can do it more than I can, but you can be truly happy just to know someone exists or something's happening, like to be truly to feel joy on behalf of another, even though that none of that joy is directly coming through you. It's decentralization. Maybe by the time we die, it's enough to know, it's enough to be content to just know that life will continue, whether it's our kids or somebody else, even if we're not going to be around to see it. There's an unparalleled joy to knowing that is happening. So anyway, thanks for your comment. Again, everything I'm saying may be absolutely not anything you feel at all, but I'm just kind of riffing. And please do jump back in if you have any other comments or thoughts about it. What else?
A few other things that have come in since then. This person just had a comment was, I see the optimal wellness movement endemic to our culture. It does not address these challenges like a fatal diagnosis.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here real quick. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay.
Still a little fuzzy, but that's okay. And I'm not sure how we can fix the fuzziness.
There's some schmutz on the lens here. Anyway, I'm so sorry. Can you please repeat the question or comment?
This person just had a comment that said, I see the optimal wellness movement endemic to our culture. It does not address these challenges, e.g. a fatal diagnosis.
Yes, I'm right. This is where some versions of the wellness industry, to the sort of spa light kind of mentality of self-care, kind of presupposes that with a positive attitude and enough broccoli, you can keep hard stuff at bay. I think that's certainly one step. Part of the issue, of course, is let's not suffer unnecessarily. Let's be thoughtful. Let's be careful. Let's treat ourselves and each other well, and to not just heap on the trouble. But really, I think as big, as important, or maybe even more important, is building the muscle, the capacity to actually deal with hard things, not just to obviate them or avoid them in your life. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think true wellness has a lot to do with things like we're talking about now, of accepting our fate, working with the world we have, not the world we wish for. And that means accepting pain, accepting diagnoses, disability, death. Is just part of the deal. And sort of let's not go down. I think we run the risk of inventing more and more spectacularly sort of pretty off ramps to that basic truth. And I wouldn't get off this super highway of reality. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think our work is to realize that we're part of that reality and work within it, and to deal with our pain, not just avoid it. So now I'm repeating myself, but any other comments from you? I think that's a really important line of inquiry here, and not something to think through, because I know that what we do with these webinars and what we're doing at Mettle Health, and sometimes it often gets considered part of the wellness industry or something like that. And fine, that sounds good. We're into wellness, well-being sounds beautiful, but we want this sort of much more rigorous sense of well-being that excludes nothing, most importantly, our own demise. So yes, I'm sorry, Sonia. Yes. Is the camera still funky, guys? Sonia, is that a problem? Should I take it off?
Maybe. I mean, it's not your words are what's important, not. But okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'll read another question that came in. Oh, now we can't see anything.
Oh. Okay. Well, you read the question. I'll let's see here.
All right, everyone, we've officially entered quasi-technical difficulty. This is the first time we've done this, so thank you for putting up with us.
Well, hold on. I think I got it. Oh.
There we go. Much clearer. So now your words and the video match up. Thanks everyone for dealing with this quick technical issue. Okay, back to the questions. So this person said, how do we minimize regret when in the moment we don't feel like we are maximizing our time, knowing it's precious? I'm a med student and finding it so hard to do the things in my life that feel important while trying to be a good student.
Yeah, can you read the first phrase of that question again?
How do we minimize regret when in the moment we don't feel like we are maximizing our time, knowing it's precious?
Yeah, this is a really good question, especially within the, I mean, I still feel for you as a med student and the way the medical training, even this is, I mean, this is sort of the super theme of all of medicine, really, is it gets at this. I mean, where medicine was invented to push back on this very thing that we're trying to accommodate here. It's a real funny little dance. And there's irony all over medicine and medical training that somehow pushes us farther and farther away from this reality, even as we're trying to fight it. So I just feel for you that it's nowhere kind of more galling and ironic that the sort of how the fear of death plays out in the medical system and medical training. I mean, you're being trained and acculturated to go to be of service in the world in this way, to help people through all sorts of things. And yet the training itself has a way of siphoning one's soul and one's spirit and pulling us away from inspiration, which is exactly what everyone needs to try another day, etc. So my first response to you is solidarity, brother or sister. It is not easy. And I would also say what you're going through a very intensive version of what we all go through. This is sort of the dilemma of daily life, of quotidian daily life. Daily life is filled with all sorts of things that you might say don't really matter in the big picture, but we spend a ton of time doing them. Errands, cleaning, all sorts of whatever it is, all sorts of stuff. And that's what gives our day structure and sense of accomplishment. And the end of the day, we can check off this or that on our list, et cetera. It gives us a sense of normalcy and predictability. And it goes a long way to barricading us against this very fear of mortality. And that's part of the hazard. There's a lot to love about daily life, but if we're not careful through work and other constraints, daily life gets filled up with all sorts of stuff and crowds out all sorts of stuff. And at some point it becomes almost just insufferable because you're spending a bunch of time on made up issues that in the big picture don't matter so much. And you're getting farther and farther away from the stuff that seems to matter so much. So this is a modern dilemma, and it's not just felt in medical training. So you're part of a sort of a contemporary problem, which is why conversations like this are so important. I wish we all had them more frequently. And I guess I would just say it is always this dance, it's always this tension between doing and being, between accomplishing and something like meditating or just being with yourself and with your thoughts and your feelings. There's always this tension. There's always more to be done. There's this sort of a daily version of what you're describing of, it's almost like a sense of proportionality. Am I finding my way to holding this big picture even while I descend into the details to focus and to deal with them while not forgetting about the big picture? And it's almost like this systole or diastole or this inspiration, expiration, I would encourage you to kind of conceive of this as a moving target. It's always in flux, and so it's a much more of a dance. And I don't know that I ever get those proportions just right in any one day, but that is sort of the work of daily life. Tomorrow I'll try again. Do I forget the big picture enough to focus on the details and let myself really get into the problem and work on it? And do I remember to re-expand at the end of that focus again, to remind myself of what really matters, et cetera, and to couch these efforts in the bigger picture? So your job, and no one's going to teach you these things in medical school, but is to find your way to this rhythm. It is a rhythm. And I don't know if I've yet to really ever feel like I ever hit the mark. What does it mean to maximize or optimize my time? I'm not even sure what that would look like. I don't know if I'd know it if I did it. It reminds me of how I grew up. Like my father, I don't know, Dad, if you're on this call, but you did something really profound for me and really annoying as hell, which is you used to say things like, just live up to your potential. That's all. You don't have to, if you're better or worse than the next guy, it doesn't matter. Just care that you reach your potential. Great. So that pointed me to this sort of self-referential piece. So if I'm the last in the race or the first in the race, it matters less. Then did I do my best and that kind of stuff? Great. Amen. It's really, I believe all of that. It's been very fertile, fruitful for me. And at the end of the day, it makes it really hard to know, well, did I live up to what's my potential? I can always do more. I can always imagine doing more, right? So is this enough? Is this my potential? Have I maximized or optimized my, I don't know what that looks like. So just keeping in mind, these are constructs, a way to push and pull yourself through daily life and to hold them loosely. But I'd question your own word choice and the concepts behind them and find a way to kind of laugh at them too. But don't let yourself get lost for too long in this medical training. If you need to take time off or a day off or whatever else, find your way to re-expanding into the big world. And don't confuse the four walls of the hospital with the four walls of the world. So anyway, maybe enough for now. There's a lot to talk about here, but yeah, shoot back, come back if there are more questions on this one.
We do have a few hands up that I want to get to. Peter, your hand has been up for a little while. Let me unmute you on this end, and you may have to unmute yourself on your end. Oh, did the hand go away?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, hey, Peter. How are you?
Peter?
Yeah. Hey, great to see you.
Nice to hear your voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks for leading a discussion on this topic. So a few things came to mind. One was there's a book called Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson that is almost it's almost just a book about the fear of dying. And he, in his experiences with people who are dying, he says that people often think that they're going to be afraid of pain and suffering. But when they actually get to the experience of dying, they experience what he says is even a terror of being forgotten, right? Or a fear of not having mattered. And for me, that kind of brings up the notion of the Day of the Dead, right? The holiday that originated in Mexico and was featured in the movie Coco, which is really all about a ritual remembrance of the dead and the idea that the dead are not really gone as long as we hold them in our minds. And so I think that's an interesting idea that our rituals and that are of maybe not of our culture but of other cultures can be helpful in helping people to realize that death is just a natural part of the cycle. And then while I've got the microphone, I'll just throw out one totally other crazy idea, which is I recently was reading a book called Beyond Biocentrism, Rethinking Time, Space, Consciousness, and the Illusion of Death. It's basically this mind-bending exploration of the implications of quantum physics for sentience or consciousness. And what it kind of raises is the idea that we're not even completely sure what it means to be alive or to feel that we're alive, right? And so, we don't even fully understand what death is. So anyway, that's, I guess, a provocation. Just I'd be interested in any thoughts or comments you have.
That's Awesome. Peter, it's really nice to hear your voice, man. I hope you and the family are doing well. So a couple thoughts. Yes, that the Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson's great book. A lot of people, and he does interesting work up in Canada. I think he still does retreats and things like that. And I think one of the points you raised there, Peter, about watching our imagination. So that human mind thing that's at the center of all this. We have very powerful imaginations, and I think oftentimes, and this comes up with families who are working through this fear of dying, is I find a way, and some usually find a way to kind of to share a wink with each other and say, to remind ourselves that our imaginations tend to be worth, like what I imagine a scary thing to be when I'm actually in the thing is often not nearly so scary. So just distinguishing between our imaginings and the actual experience is a really important one, and remembering that our imaginations are biased towards the negative and the scary. So that alone can often help sort of calm nerves. It does for me. So I think that's a beautiful reminder. And your other point here, man, about this is not to be self whatever, but this was at the heart of the article I wrote in the New York Times, an op-ed last year, about a year ago, about what I think it was called "What is Death?" Because we don't really, you're right, we're not even sure that we can act, we know we can't really describe consciousness. I'm not even sure exactly what it means to be alive, and therefore we're not really actually sure what it means to be dead. I mean, in a more concrete way, you can just think about what happens to just what you can witness. The emotional reactions that we catalyze in each other, those linger. Those, just because, Peter, you and I haven't spoken in a while. That's not that I've forgotten you. It's not that I remember the sound of your voice immediately. There's been a life between us, even if we're not together. And so it goes after we die. I mean, I think about the emotional residue of my sister. I mean, she's 20 years dead. So that's still very much alive. Her image is still alive. Her impact on the world and on me still going. Her body, well, if we had not put her in a concrete bunker, she would be decaying and be worm food, and even her body would now be hosting other life, and that goes on. So it gets pretty hard to know what to say, actually, what the heck death is. And I'm just sort of repeating everything you were saying, Peter, but it's a really not only just fascinating inquiry, but it can really blow open the doors on what we think we're afraid of and what we think might be possible or impossible. And it turns out, at the very least, the subject is just friggin' fascinating. And it's powerful to realize, as much as we human beings know and understand about this world, there's plenty we don't. And I find comfort in that. And I find comfort in that mystery. And I find comfort in not knowing. It helps me sort of surrender to it. But I do think quantum thinking, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, whether it's going to be in our computing or in our philosophies or a way we think of ourselves or a way we play ourselves out, I think we're just beginning to experience the potential there, and it's frigging fascinating. I mean, we should talk more about that in this very series. So anyway, thank you, Peter. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. Any other hands up, Sonia?
Yeah, we've got a few hands here. So Esther, you've had your hand up for a while. Let me unmute you. You might have to unmute yourself on your end. Second.
While you're doing that, I just want to, you just reminded me about Peter's comment about remembering.
Oh.
I think,
Esther, are you there?
Am I here?
Yes.
Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Wrong button. Yeah, I just got caught up in what Peter said and that discussion there, and forgot my other point. Kind of got on the train. Peter, you just blew my mind. Thank you for that. Expansion of the quantum physics coming into the mix. Because yeah, that almost, for me, I just had an experience of expansion, of relaxing, which I think sometimes going out of, it's like that push-pull between between that daily living and the construct of what society dictates, and I kind of just put that in quotes because I know that's a great big umbrella, kind of big brash stroke, and rising above that a little bit into possibility. It's kind of what that's making me think about, and it brings me back to just wanting to say thank you to the medical student for bringing that up, and what I wanted to bring up that tension between wanting to live every moment fully and be, engaged in life, and being caught up in the great to-do list. And I wanted to add that I think that part of an antidote, or potentially an antidote to that, is just the sharing of it and the talking about it and the willingness to talk about it, because then we kind of go, there's the ability for us to say, oh yeah, well, I have that too, and I have that too, and then maybe we can, then it just doesn't feel so awful, and we're not beating ourselves so much with the big stick of, oh, I'm wasting my life, shoveling the sidewalk or picking up dog poo or fixing that last thing or spending 6 hours on the phone. When we can just go, okay, I'm spending 6 hours on the phone, that's okay. Or I'm, just that's somehow reconciling just being okay with being.
Right on.
And the cult of busyness that there's a bit of a cult of busyness, I think. I wonder about that in our,
oh yeah,
not everywhere, but certainly here. And I think that there's a bit of value placed on doing and product and end result, as opposed to the idea of process. Like, we're just in this process of life. It's a process, and I think there's something in that, maybe. Anyway.
I love what you're saying, Esther. I'm with you. I think, what you're reminding me is, and thanks for your hearkening to the med student too, the med student, sorry, med student.
Yeah, sorry.
But this idea is, I think two things to be clear of what you just pointed out, Esther, is I think it's very useful to remember when we're reacting to constructs, in other words, inventions, things we've made up, versus reacting to life or reality, or this huge, much bigger thing behind it, underneath it. Because when we're reacting to constructs, well, I think it's useful to remember that that's made up. It may be very real, it's happening, it's true, but it's also kind of made up. And just that alone gives it a little bit of perspective. It may still hold a huge charge and be very consequential in a real way, but it's still a construct. So that also points us to our mind as a way to reframe it, to perhaps look at this a little differently. That's where we have the control as human beings of perspective. So how we see things can impact how we experience them, of course. And there's some quantum comments to be made in there too. So I think also is to not being seduced into thinking that daily life means nothing. It's not that it means nothing at all. Rather, I think reminding ourselves it's a construct, but bringing our whole selves to these things means, in other words, I don't want med student or anybody else, myself included, to put this is just a construct. So I'm going to put my bigger things on the shelf. I'm going to go into this sort of fabricated lie zone and tinker around in there and come back out to the real important things, the things that actually matter. I think that's a very way to think. It's like, no, everything matters. It's a matter of keeping perspective, and you bring everything with you where you go. So don't put the truth on the shelf. It's never on the shelf unless you put it there, and you bring it with you, whether it's picking up dog poop or performing CPR or getting married or whatever it is. They're real because you're there.
And yeah, sure. It's all a bit of a construct, really. Like, the quantum physics comes in when we go, okay, so what is reality? And I think what I'm hearing you say, BJ, is that it's also the idea that when you're washing rice, wash rice.
Yeah, really do. Yes.
And that there's value in there's simply value in the act, and then everything relates to, you know, everything kind of leads. There's a chain reaction that happens, because if I'm able to just pick up dog poo when I'm picking up dog poo, or wash rice when I'm washing rice, or whatever, then that allows me to be in the moment of it and to find value in the moment of it. And then also, when I'm not able to be in that moment, to forgive myself or be okay with wherever I've gone, past, future. There's something around the accepting of oneself and one's experience and whatever it is, the whole big bag, the whole story, because it's just a story, really, and we can be in our stories or change our stories, or, you know, accept our stories or not. And reconciling that, not just to the fear, but the absolute certainty, like it's the one thing I actually know, is that I am going to die. And so reconciling to that absolute knowledge is a little bit different than fear. It's living every day. It's getting up every day knowing. It's the holding that one piece of knowledge.
Right on. You're also making me think about the construct of language. And sometimes, is it really fear, or am I just overwhelmed, or am I just actually in awe? I mean, I think of terror and beauty, for me, go really closely related. As words, they might seem like they should be opposite ends of a spectrum, but actually I think they're pretty dang close in my experience, for example. So getting underneath all these words and everything else, the words are great, they're important, as are our jobs, as is picking up the dog poop, fine. But it's a sense of proportionality, and when you do that, whether you're washing rice or whatever, when you bring attention to it, you are the source, you are bringing life to it. There's life there because you're there, at least. So anyway, yeah, I love the way this conversation's going, but are there more hands up, guys? I know we have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Oh, thanks, Esther. Let's see here. So we've got one more hand up. Jackie, I'm gonna unmute you. Sorry to put you at the very end here. Jackie, you may need to unmute yourself when you're at, there you are.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't work very well. So this is a little bit of a different direction. So I work for a life plan community. We practice relationship-based care. And back when COVID started, we locked in for 77 days. We started passing away.
Sorry, Jackie. There was a moment of just kind of feedback there. Would you mind repeating yourself on where you're working?
So I work for a life plan community, which is a continuing care retirement community. You know, all levels of care. When the pandemic began, 77 employees who lived on site and never left. So COVID would not come in. We practice a relationship-based care. So we ask our associates to get vulnerable, to get close, and to love members and residents within their homes. When people started passing away after we went home, now we're asking them, and we do really bad at death. We do very bad at death. And so now we're asking them to love people again, but they're afraid to because they're going to lose them again. And there's this fear. And I'm feeling it myself, and I'm supposed to be training these people on how to let people in and be vulnerable and feel those things. And so I struggle with that every day. On how I can ask people to get close and love people that they know are going to die and that may die from COVID. And there's a fear there.
Jackie, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a little hard to hear you, but I think I'm hearing that you're making the point that in the community you work, that you're working closely over time, and you're encouraging people you work with to love the residents, love the people that care, even while losing them. And I think if I heard you right, you're pointing us to this notion that if you're not, that loving can feel like a hazard. Vulnerability can feel like a real hazard.
Very much so.
Yeah, yeah. And I absolutely agree with you. And this also reminds me of the comment earlier about wellness. Like, I think part of our job here as human beings is certainly in the sort of service industry, health and well-being is, it's like we have to get better at losing. Like there's a skill in losing. This is, I got to get better at experiencing pain, or I can, there's something I can do there. It's not to obviate the pain as much as to learn how to live with it and dance with it. Similarly, if I'm hearing you correctly, Jackie, a lot of the training I would imagine for the folks you work with is, yes, love them, but also part of training is learning like how to lose. Because we're going to lose again and again. We're going to lose each other. We're going to lose parts of ourselves again and again and again. And that's a big source of the learning. And that goes with love. So I hope I heard you correctly there, Jackie, if my comments didn't make any sense. But any quick retort, and then we should probably hang up and we'll record the remaining questions separately. But was there anything more you wanted to say real quickly, Jackie? No?
Again, there you are.
If you heard me correctly, it just seems painful to ask people to give more of their heart.
I get it. Yeah. And I don't know. And I think this is also, I don't think the part of the job is to just fillet ourselves all the time. I think boundaries are important. They're there for a reason. We all have limitations too. So it's not just get back in there and lose some more. I think there's got to be a rhythm wherever we work that honors and takes a moment to honor the person that's gone now. So mourning rituals, grief rituals should, I would imagine, be very poignant in a place like where you work, and part of just as much as part of winding up with new residents and patients and learning to love them and getting to know them. I would imagine grief and mourning rituals would be really extra powerful. Again, there's a skill to losing in a way. It's a muscle, at least, we can exercise. So anyway, Jack, I hope I heard everything correctly there, but thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for participating. This has been a fascinating conversation. And again, there's hours more we could talk about together. So thanks for coming. And Sonia and I will record the remaining questions and shoot those out to you guys in an email. And again, thanks so much for being here. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.